we are playing a dangerous game when we keep saying, well, because Russia hasn't done anything so far, they never will, so we can just keep doing this stuff. And I don't know why you even want to risk that, because it's not going to change the outcome for your side. It's not going to improve anything. It's not going to make the Russians force them into anything, because they don't have to. It's self-evident that we don't need to. And I just don't understand why we keep playing with this. It's as though some actually want this to be expanded. It's like some in Europe actually hope that Russia, this Duma leader, makes good on that threat, and that they actually do fire across the border of Ukraine and hit something on NATO territory. It's almost like some would be gleeful if they get to say, yay, Article 5, we get to impose it, and now here we go, here's a big war. Why would any rational person do that? And I know some people say, well, it's about money, and they can, okay, money's not going to do any good if you're in a damn grave. If people keep dying, and especially some of these people who allegedly would benefit from it, if you get into a general war with Russia, folks, nobody wins in that case. I mean, the chances of it going nuclear are just through the roof. Nobody better fight one of those wars. And why are we playing around the edges of it? It is irrational and immoral as it can be, because you're risking the lives of potentially millions of people who are presently at peace in Europe right now. We don't need to put other people's lives at risk by taking these absurd kind of situations here. Now, Peskov mentioned a minute ago these memorandums that were going to be written and these upcoming peace talks. Well, not apparently, now then the next date has been firmed up by the Russian side, and Sergei Lavrov announced that today.
Тогда же в Стамбуле было условлено о том, что Москва и Киев подготовят документы, излагающие позицию каждой из сторон для достижения устойчивого урегулирования. Российская сторона, как и договаривались, оперативно разработала соответствующий меморандум, который излагает нашу позицию по всем аспектам надежного преодоления первопричин кризиса. Наша делегация во главе с Владимиром Мединским готова представить этот меморандум делегации Украины и дать необходимые пояснения в ходе второго раунда возобновленных прямых переговоров в Стамбуле в ближайший понедельник, 2 июня.
So again, Russia says, even despite all these things that have happened, even despite the threats that Peskov mentioned a minute ago, they're still going down the diplomatic track. They're still planning on meeting on Monday. They're going to give this memorandum. We know the memorandum is going to be the ugly terms that we've talked about before. Won't be a surprise. I could probably write that memorandum and be pretty close to what turns out to be the case. So we're pretty clear what's going to happen on Monday. It's also clear, by the way, that the Ukraine side is also preparing its own memorandum. They will deliver that to the Russian side. I could probably write that one too. Not hard to do. All I got to do is look at Zelensky's Twitter feed, and I can probably pull it out of there. It'll be pretty easy. The two sides are going to be so far out there, not even in my visual screen here. They're so far apart. And so that almost certainly is going to lead to just a continuation of the offensive here. But one of the things that I want to address here in the last bit that we have before we end this episode is what is Russia's actual intent after that? Because it should be self-evident to everyone now that Ukraine, writ large, with all the support from the West, doesn't have the capacity to stop Russia. Whether that's fast, medium, or slow, the end is already decreed. So at some point, that's going to be a Ukraine defeat if they don't agree to any version of ugly terms that are being offered this coming Monday. What then does that mean for Russia? Well, now what people have been saying relentlessly, actually before this war started and certainly all the time since in the West, is that Russia and Putin specifically want to recreate the Soviet Union. They want the Russian Empire to reign again on the continent of Europe. Well, at an international peace conference in Moscow, I believe it was today, Vladimir Putin addressed what his version is of security in Europe.
I have said it many times and will repeat. We are convinced that the new security architecture must be equal and indivisible, meaning all states should receive firm guarantees of their own security, but not at the expense of the security and interests of other countries. It is important to make our continent a space of peace and stability, an example of sustainable economic, social, and cultural development.
Now, that doesn't sound very Hitlerian-like. Now, remember, Hitler was big on talking about Lebensraum and all these other kind of things, that they needed more space and they needed to help out their compatriots in all these other countries, etc. They had this big army that was built that could easily have legitimately put at risk the entire continent, because they had, I think, a couple million men under arms even early, turned into be many more than that as time went on. That's not the case here in Russia, because Russia's talking about they want a security architecture to replace whatever's going on now and what has been in effect since the end of World War II, with something that has equal security and stability for everybody, where everybody can live at peace. And he mentioned several existing security architectures that he said that could be samples, and they're all things that exist now. I think it was the OSCE was one, and several others, where he's saying, look, there's plenty of things that we can use it to mirror off of. All the things that all the groups that he mentioned are things that are organizations that are designed to have peaceful coexistence, things that allow people to have security and to not threaten anybody else. And I think the OSCE itself is one of the things that's predicated on nobody's security can be obtained at the expense of someone else's security. He said all states have to have the ability to have security. Now, you can say, well, yeah, obviously that doesn't, you don't think that applies to Ukraine. And he would say, no, it doesn't, because of what the other 50 states that came against us did, because they were trying to secure Ukraine's security at the expense of ours and moving their NATO lines right up to our border in Ukraine, which we told everybody was a red line. So their claim is that once this gets established here, then that's where we want to say, let's now apply that equally, so that no one has to put us in that position again. That's his position. You don't have to agree with it. You can say it's not true or whatever. But again, as I always say, the ground is what matters. Does he talk about wanting to conquer other countries? Or does he talk about wanting to live in security with other countries? We see where that is. Now, what about the capacity? Is he, like Hitler, building up this multi-million man army to have peace while he's getting ready to have this big army somewhere else? So far, the answer is no. They are bigger than they were, than they have been in the past, but their stated objective is to defend their country. They have never said that they wanted to go and take other countries because they want to take it. They have said that they don't want anyone else to attack them on their western border. That's what the Russian objective has always been, especially since 1991, after the Soviet Union dissolved and it became the Russian Federation. Since that time, they have not talked about conquered anyone else. They've been talking about national security and the defense of their frontiers and their borders. So their forces that they have now are bigger than they were in February 2022. And we also have to look at the context. That's in context of people like Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, several other countries, the UK, for example. Germany is also, they keep saying we need to prepare for war. We need to get ready to fight. Obviously, there's only one person on the continent that they would fight, and that's Russia. The European Union itself is saying we have a rearm program, like a 10-year period, where we want to spend $800 billion on top of what's being spent right now. We need to upgrade everything. So that stuff doesn't happen in a void, folks, because it's this whole escalation ladder. One action by one side creates a counteraction by the other side. And then the other side sees this action. They say, well, we have to now ramp up more. This side sees that, and there's that, well, we're not going to be on the bottom end. And you see where this goes. This turns into an arms race. And in the current environment, to where people seem have almost no limits on what they can do, and willingness to take all kinds of risk, as Chancellor Merz is doing right now, that should cause great concern for all of us. It is time to ratchet down the rhetoric and to ramp up diplomacy and find new ways to figure this out. Ramping up military ain't going to keep you safe, folks. That's going to just probably continue to light the fuse of a future conflict. It's going to be the classic self-fulfilling prophecy. It's happened many times in human history. We're on that path now. We need to cut this fuse and get it off the table now. One of the first things we can do is to get the Russia-Ukraine war off the table. It's finished, folks. Don't have any fantasies that by continuing on with more weapons, more ammunition, more joint production inside Ukraine, etc., that you can ever stop what's going to happen now. It's just not possible, mainly because of the manpower issue. Ukraine can never muster because they have catastrophically lost their manpower pool. There's so many that have been killed, they'll never be able to recover it in a generation or two. It'll take that long to be able to recover. Russia, on the other hand, is continuing to grow. Don't test that theory out. It's very close to being rock solid and irrefutable. But if we don't do what's wise and rational, then we're going to find out things happen that we don't like very much. That's not ordained. Nothing is ordained. We always have the chance to take off-ramps. We have rejected every off-ramp that's been offered so far. It is time to stop that insanity, cut this fuse before it gets any closer to exploding, and we need to start having more dialogue. We need to have more talks and anything besides building up military forces. We've got plenty to defend ourselves now. If Russia should blindly attack us tomorrow, there's a lot of combat power now that we can deal with that. But don't start continuing on this, going up the escalation ladder, because one day, all it takes, folks, is one missile to get through the Russian side to strike something of real meaning, and the patience on the Russian side can evaporate, and God only knows what could happen then. Let's don't find out. Let's use our sanity. Let's use the wisdom that does exist and start taking some courage. And if these leaders can't get it done, then we need to find other leaders who will and elevate them through the democratic process. Even if that's ugly and difficult and takes a lot of time, that's what we need to do for our own future and our own hope, so that everybody has a chance to live in prosperity and in peace. It's not off the table. It is possible. We'll see how that works out there. But thank you very much for joining us today. Sorry, Patrick Bob we weren't able to make that work out. We'll get him back on as soon as we can. But we do know that we have former CIA analyst Larry Johnson with us this afternoon at 2 o'clock. So a little over an hour from now. And we're going to talk specifically about this so-called 2-week deadline that Putin was just given by Trump in the Oval Office yesterday. And as always, Larry has a lot of great things to say. We'll see you then at 2 o'clock on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.